You ever wish you had a time machine? Where would you go? Who would you meet? Would you experience a time which you never lived, or would you reunite with your own past? Where would you go? You ever look at old black and white photographs or watch old movies and wish, if only I could just go back to that time? If only there were a place where time stood still, a place where all the remember whens live again. Well, there will be. There will be. Hello, I'm Marty Lange, project coordinator for the renovation of the historic Uptown Theater in downtown Sedalia, Missouri, a National Historic District. I also happen to be building a time machine, and I need your help. I'll tell you how you can help, but first, let me show you my time machine and take you on a walk through history in a little town known as the Queen of the Prairies, Sedalia, Missouri. In the late 1800s through the turn of the century, Sedalia was a booming railroad and cattle town with its sights set on becoming the new Missouri state capital, which never happened, but we did get the Missouri State Fair, and we'll talk about that more later. The city was a major crossroads for three railroads. It had a notorious reputation for lawlessness, brothels, prostitution, hard drinking, gambling, so much so it was even called Little Chicago. Sedalia was home to several theaters and opera houses, and at the turn of the century, Sedalia residents Scott Joplin, Arthur Marshall, and Scott Hayden, among others, created a new sound called ragtime music. Sedalia was home to music publishers, musician and theatrical unions, and around the turn of the century, Pettis County was the birthplace of some great movie stars. Stars who would be seen on the silver screens of their hometown theaters some 20-plus years later. Enter J.T. Goshen. Joseph Goshen was a Lebanese immigrant who came to Missouri in the early 1920s. He found work selling hardware, and along with his business-savvy wife, Mercedes, Goshen was quickly becoming a successful entrepreneur. In 1927, Goshen moved to Sedalia after being persuaded to enter the theater business. Silent movies were all the rage in 1927, and Goshen saw a new opportunity, so he took it. He and his wife Mercedes opened the Star Theater at 116 West 2nd Street in downtown Sedalia. The Star was a storefront theater, or a store building, which had been converted for stage shows and vaudeville shows. The Star presented the first talkie, or talking picture, a year after Goshen opened it. The success of the new talkies was great, but Goshen longed for a grand palace of diversion. A beautiful theater, state-of-the-art, built from the ground up. In 1936, he saw his chance, and once again, he took it. On June 10, 1936, the Goshens opened their brand new Uptown Theater with two storefronts at 227 and 229 South Ohio, in the heart of Sedalia's downtown district. The city imposed a new tax on property owners who owned buildings with more than 2 stories. The tax charged more for each additional floor. The result was catastrophic. Some of Sedalia's grandest buildings were decapitated, the top floors removed. Businesses closed, and people lost hope. However, people still wanted to be entertained and wanted an escape. The theater industry boomed during the Great Depression, and across the country, beautiful Art Deco designed theaters were built. Several by renowned architects, the Bowler brothers of Kansas City, Missouri. One of these theaters was the Uptown in Sedalia. In an era when nobody was building and buildings around him were being reduced in their grandeur, Goshen built a showpiece that stood out more than any other building for miles around, thanks to its neon lights and brightly colored Art Deco facade. It must be said, for a Lebanese immigrant to move to a rough and rowdy, racially divided railroad town in the 1930s and build this exotically decorated theater just a block away from the county courthouse took a lot of tenacity and perseverance. The Uptown would spend 26 years entertaining Sedalians and travelers passing through on one of the trains. The legendary Tex Ritter performed here. So did Tex Owens during the Brush Creek Follies. Other entertainers performed on the Uptown stage. Vaudeville remained a big part of the Uptown through the 1940s, when vaudeville had already left most stages. Games of chance were popular at the Uptown in the 1930s. Games such as Scoopo and Screeno would attract great crowds to enjoy a movie and a chance to win prizes. City and county officials believed the games of chance to be a form of gambling, and legal action ensued. The games of chance ended, but fortunately, artifacts from this era were packed away and hidden to be uncovered more than 60 years later by myself. The 1940s was the Uptown's heyday. America was at war. Every man, woman, and child was part of the war effort. Patrons who came to enjoy a movie featuring the greatest actresses and actors of all time during the golden era of silver screen also watched the newsreels, keeping up with the war effort, many hoping to catch a glimpse of their loved ones fighting against evil on the other side of the world. When World War II ended in 1945, America entered the baby boom. The baby boom began the third era for the Uptown. Cartoons and matinees were very successful during the late 40s through the 50s. Westerns were big draws for the Uptown. During the 1950s, the Uptown hosted talent shows, beauty contests, and other such events, in addition to movies and the concession selection group. The late 1950s brought rock and roll bands to the Uptown, but the times, they were soon to be a-changing. By 1962, nearly every American home owned a television set. With the tube's rise came the theater's fall, and that was the case for the Uptown Theater. Due to falling audience numbers, the Uptown Theater closed in early 1962. The Sedalia Democrat newspaper stated in September of 1962 that an apathy towards the arts impedes Sedalia's culture. The full-page article noted that with the rise of the television, Sedalia's theaters had suffered, and the number of concert bands and choirs had dramatically been reduced. The newspaper was correct in its assertion of the arts in Sedalia's culture. During the 1960s, the world was in a sociological turmoil. Modernization was the trend. The progressive thinking of the 1960s was good in some ways, such as the civil rights movement, but devastating in terms of historic preservation. Historic districts across the country began erecting aluminum facades on their historic properties. This was to give them a more modern look, supposedly to appeal to shoppers and increase business by improving the aesthetic. Truth be told, it was devastating to many historic buildings, allowing all sorts of damage. Some of Sedalia's taller and more grand buildings, designed by world-renowned architects and built during the westward expansion, sadly saw a second wave of decapitations, this time in the name of modernization as opposed to taxation. The 1960s brought expansion and growth to Sedalia. Several factories came to town, and the city limits expanded to the south and to the west, flanking the Missouri State Fairgrounds. Shopping centers, apartment complexes, and suburban living came to town. Meanwhile, the once bustling historic center of town was struggling to compete. The sidewalks were crumbling. Some of Sedalia's oldest buildings were lost to fire or collapse. The nearby Liberty or Lona Theater closed, leaving only the Fox Theater downtown. The Uptown would sit empty, other than its two occupied storefronts. Then on June 23rd of 1972, a fifth era began for the Uptown. The Goshen family and Commonwealth Theaters reopened the Uptown. This reopening coincided with a remodeling of the Fox Theater 2 blocks away, also owned by the Commonwealth Company at the time. The original seats from the Fox Theater were placed in the Uptown. Almost all of the original seats from the Uptown were sadly thrown away, except for a couple from the main level and a few rows of seats from the balcony. The original marquee was replaced by a thin marquee and a new paint job on the facade and no neon tubes. The Uptown reopened for the premiere of the classic The Godfather. However, the Uptown management decided to close the theater permanently in April of 1974, blaming a lack of good products for their decision. The Uptown hosted some R and even X-rated films during this era, but ultimately felt it was just too much trouble. They also operated the successful 50 Drive-In and the State Fair Twin Cinema across town. So for the next 3 decades, the Uptown sat vacant. The 1980s brought little improvement to Sedalia's historic district. With the fast-paced 80s, few cared about these old buildings, and many downtown businesses closed shop, some that had been owned by Sedalia families for generations. Looking back in time, if one stops with the 80s, one would probably think all hope for a bustling downtown Sedalia had been lost. And it could have been had it not been for a new interest in the past and an appreciation for our heritage that began growing in the 1990s. During the 1990s, the Furnell family purchased and restored the historic Hotel Bothwell in downtown Sedalia. The newly renovated hotel, complete with fine dining, a ballroom, coffee shop, and speakeasy, started the ball rolling for not only redevelopment but conservation of Sedalia's National Historic District. Other property owners in downtown Sedalia took notice, and slowly but steadily downtown Sedalia began restoring and revitalizing itself. Through the efforts of the City of Sedalia and Sedalia Downtown Development Incorporated, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation and promotion of Sedalia's historic district, the years since the late 90s have seen almost every building remove their aluminum facades. Real estate transactions downtown have increased every year. New businesses have opened and become very successful. The Fox Theater was completely remodeled and became a conference center and event center, hosting meetings, receptions, and such. The Liberty Theater has also reopened, featuring plays and musicals and a new art gallery. Buildings are being restored and new apartment complexes have been built around downtown. Historic buildings whose top floors have been vacant for decades now house residents. Books on Sedalia's history fly off store shelves. And downtown Sedalia is home to the annual Scott Joplin International Ragtime Festival, the Queen of the Prairies Festival of the Arts, among other events. Not to mention, Sedalia is the home of the Missouri State Fair. Now it's time to bring Sedalia's crown jewel back to its 1936 glitz and sparkle. Welcome to my time machine. No, not that time machine. But if you have a DeLorean, that's really cool. I grew up on the sidewalks of downtown Sedalia. I'd spend my teen years in the 90s staring through the windows of the closed-up downtown shops, and I'd wonder what stories these buildings had to tell. One building in particular always pulled at my heartstrings, the Uptown Theater. I loved the building so much I even had my senior photos taken in front of it. I worked in radio and the entertainment industry in one form or another from the time I was out of high school, and I'd move off to Nashville, Tennessee, and meet some amazing people and learn a lot about the industry. And even though I was living young and wild and free far from home, the Uptown Theater would always be close to my heart. In 2006, Margie Wagonish, the daughter of the founder of the Uptown, J.T. Goshen, donated the Uptown to Sedalia Downtown Development in hopes that her father's Palace of Diversion would someday entertain again. The Uptown had been neglected for several years prior to the death of J.T. Goshen, and a bad roof led to water damage and pigeons. Lots of pigeons. Along with the property, the funding for a new roof was donated, thus ending the water damage in 2008. New electric service was also installed to accommodate the needs of a new theater. For 6 more years, the Uptown waited in limbo. Plans to convert it into a space for the Scott Joplin Foundation were made, but those plans fell through and were scrapped. Then in 2015, I moved home, and little did I know that my life was about to change forever, and a new chapter in the story of the Uptown Theater would be written. Upon returning to Sedalia, I took a local radio job and learned that the Uptown had been donated to Sedalia Downtown Development. So I wasted no time. I quickly built a relationship with SDDI, and a partnership was formed. At last, after 42 years of being closed, the Uptown has a direction and a new bright future as a place where Remember When lives again. We wish to renovate the Uptown Theater as closely to its original 1936 appearance as functionally possible while making modern improvements so it may be a shining landmark for our district and community. We will expand the size of the stage, add ADA-compliant bathrooms, and the best state-of-the-art audio, projection, and lighting equipment we can find. When complete, the Uptown Theater will seat around 700 people. The Uptown shall once again provide cinema to downtown Sedalia and will host a greater variety of live entertainment than any other performance venue within more than 50 miles. Our services will be affordable and our products will meet the expectations of a discerning public. We hope to maintain a healthy, successful theater that brings the community together and promotes commerce within our district. The Uptown will host a different variety of movies than our community is accustomed to seeing. We will primarily show classic movies formatted to fit our screen, movies in which the federal copyrights have expired and become public domain. In addition to public domain films, we will also show other classic movies a minimum of one night per week, in which we pay a film licensing agency the required performance fees for copyrighted works. These movies will be what I call modern classics, such as Honey, I Shrunk the Kids or The Breakfast Club, for example, for family night or date night. The Uptown Theater believes variety is the spice of life, and when it comes to live entertainment, we insist on becoming the leading live music and comedy venue in Central Missouri. The Uptown will host musical acts from a diverse spectrum of genres, signed and unsigned alike. Regional talent and nationally acclaimed talent will both take the stage. We intend to host a live performance at least 2 times a month. They could be regional acts or from more acclaimed acts, such as successful independent acts that draw large followings. Examples would be the Carolina Chocolate Drops, King's X, or the Quaby Sisters. Some of these performances will be acts from Branson who don't mind coming to Sedalia to perform on an off night for pricing comparable with their own theaters, while promoting their own theater destination to our customers. We will also book acts who were once hitmakers. In addition to the concessions theater goers are accustomed to, such as popcorn and fountain sodas, the Uptown Theater will carry a wide and interesting selection of retro sodas and candies, Missouri wines, as well as domestic, import, and craft beers. At the Uptown, nostalgia is a key selling point. We desire for each and every customer to have a fun and nostalgic experience. Therefore, we will offer vintage bottled sodas such as Ski, Bubble Up, Mr. Cola, Ale 81, Brownie Root Beer, Spiffy Cola, just to name a few. Vintage candies would include Bonomo's Turkish Taffy, Boston Baked Beans, Cracker Jacks, Candy Buttons, Rock Candy, and Goo Goo Clusters. Our selection of specialty concessions and alcohol will rotate often, as we are determined to provide a unique experience every time a customer visits. It doesn't stop with great entertainment and concessions. The Uptown will also house a museum dedicated to entertainers with Pettis County roots. The museum will feature artifacts and opportunities to learn about Pettis Countyans such as Jack Oakey, Pearl White, Lucille McVeigh, also known as Mrs. Sidney Drew, Scott Joplin, Arthur Marshall, Scott Hayden, Ann Baker, Leroy Van Dyke, Johnny Nace, and the first Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy Dawn Ilgenfritz. The silent movie star's family built the Commerce Building directly across the street from the Uptown, which still stands and has recently been renovated and become a very nice apartment building. The museum will also celebrate the history of the property. Though the Uptown was built in 1936, the northeast and south walls from the building built at the site in 1883 still stand and were reinforced with steel I-beams in 1936. These old walls belonged to a pool hall that featured a bowling alley, a tobacco store, soda shop, and candy store known as the Smokehouse. Enter Johnny Red Layton, world champion pocket billiards master. Johnny Layton, a Sedalian, spent his formative years honing his billiards skills in the Smokehouse, which belonged to his friend Charles McHenry. Layton would set many records and is regarded as a master billiardist to this day. Just another cool twist in the history of the Uptown Theater. Our target demographic is simple: living. From children's films to timeless classic movies appealing to every generation, there will be plenty of great movie watching experiences for everyone. From jazz to blues, from country to bluegrass, from rock to classical, and performances by comedians and magicians, all at good prices. Surely concert goers will come from miles around to enjoy Sedalia's restored, revived, and resurrected Uptown Theater. In August 2015, my brother, a handful of volunteers, and myself began working on cleaning out the Uptown. Since then, the building has had all water-damaged portions, the stage, debris, carpet, tile, plaster, ceiling tiles, insulation, boiler, seats, plumbing, and electrical removed. And the pigeons are gone too. Hundreds of hours have been spent researching the history of the theater and of the property before the Uptown. Hundreds of artifacts from not only the Uptown but several other theaters in Sedalia's history have been uncovered, and donations of historic artifacts have been made, some of which I have been sworn to secrecy of until the reopening of the Uptown. But let's just say they're one-of-a-kind, jaw-dropping, and extremely important pieces of American music and film history. Since 2015, we have held fundraisers and developed a lot of local support. The support from the entertainment community has been overwhelming. In 2016, we applied for tax incremental financing through the Sedalia Midtown TIF District. Our request for financing was approved by the TIF Commission. However, when it reached the City Council, it was approved on a paid-as-available basis, meaning we would get periodic disbursements, and the project could take years to finish, if ever. In January 2017, I left my job to dedicate myself full-time to the renovation and resurrection of the Uptown Theater. I have also supplied the Uptown with almost all lumber needed for the renovation, but we still need a lot of help. We need funding to cover electrical, HVAC, plumbing, seating, projection, sound, lighting, tile, carpet, fixtures, and startup and operating expenses. We are needing and accepting donations of money, materials, and/or labor. The Uptown Theater is owned by Sedalia Downtown Development Incorporated, a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization. Therefore, all contributions are tax-deductible and just good karma. With your help, this beautiful theater can be saved and last for generations. And hey, just think how cool it would be to come to this theater, sit down with a cold bottle of a soda and candy that you haven't tasted maybe since you were a kid, stuff your mouth with buttery popcorn, and enjoy a classic film, or grab a cold beer or wine and enjoy a concert by one of your favorite stars. How cool would it be to take an afternoon off and enjoy a classic movie matinee with the kids or grandkids and visit a museum in the same place? Imagine the memories you'll be reunited with. Imagine a place where Remember When lives again. Now stop imagining. Let's make it a reality.
Where is now my father's family that was here so long ago, sitting round the kitchen fireside, brightened by the ruddy glow? We shall all be reunited in that land beyond the skies, where there'll be no separation, no more parting, no more sighs. Some have gone to lands far distant, and with others made their home. Some upon the world of waters all their lives.